Welcome to the Brooklyn Historical Society, where the vibrant history of Brooklyn is made tangible, meaningful, and relevant today. These videos feature inspirational highlights and excerpts from our teaching and learning materials. To find more resources about the history of Brooklyn, visit us online at www.brooklynhistory.org. This is the second video in a three-part series about the history of public health in Brooklyn. This video explores the long history of Barren Island and its reputation as the smelliest island in New York. Hundreds of years ago, there was a marshy island located within Jamaica Bay that the Lenni Lenape, the original inhabitants of the area, called Equitable, meaning broken lands. The Lenni Lenape are the indigenous peoples of the greater New York region, and Equitable was one of the areas where they fished and harvested oysters. After the arrival of the Dutch and English settlers, the island was used as a grazing site for pigs, hogs, and cattle and renamed Barren Island. By the mid-1800s, New York City had a public health challenge that Barren Island helped address. The then separate cities of New York and Brooklyn needed to figure out what to do with the remains of dead animals. Before the invention of cars and other forms of transportation, residents used horse-drawn carriages to move around the city. When these horses died, the city had to dispose of their carcasses. Several business people saw Barren Island as the solution to this problem. As a relatively small island removed from the more densely populated areas of Manhattan and Brooklyn, Barren Island remained isolated, with few human inhabitants, for a much longer time than other areas in New York City. The city would pay to have animal carcasses collected from piers on Manhattan and taken by boat to Barren Island. Barren Island became known for its nuisance factories. When a horse or other animal died in New York City, its remains were taken to Barren Island, where these factories turned the remains into profitable products. Workers at the factories melted down the animal remains in large iron vats equipped with tightly fitted covers. This process separated meat from bones, and the leftover animal fat, also known as tallow, was used for candles, soap, and to grease carriage wheels. Larger bones were charred and used as a filter for refining sugar, while smaller bones were cut up for button manufacturing. In the end, most of the animal remains sent to Barren Island were turned into glue and fertilizer. Working in a nuisance factory was hard, dangerous work with many hazards. In the early 1900s, the workers of Barren Island were mostly poor European immigrants and African American men from the South. The wages were low, but this was one of the only options available for these workers. Workers loaded the dead animals into large containers filled with boiling acid, a process that produced horrible fumes and smells. Workers had to be careful because they could be burned or crushed to death, and the oil in the machinery made factory floors slippery. One worker was almost killed when he slipped and fell headfirst into the garbage in the machinery. Thankfully, another worker intervened before the man was crushed to death. Despite the tight-fitting lids and attempts to use as much of the animals as possible, nuisance factories on Barren Island contributed to air and water contamination. In addition to the noxious gases generated by the factory work, any leftover animal remains were tossed into Jamaica Bay. As a result of the nature of the factories on the island and the remains dumped into the water, the area of Jamaica Bay next to Barren Island became known as Dead Horse Bay. In fact, people still find pieces of horse skeletons that wash up on the shore. Dead Horse Bay is now part of Floyd Bennett Field and National Park. The end of Barren Island came with the invention of the automobile. When cars began to replace horses as the main method of transportation, horse rendering factories were no longer needed. As the industry left the island, many of the workers who had made their homes there followed, and by 1930, only a few hundred people still lived on the island. In the 1930s, aviation was becoming more important to the city, and an airport was needed. The nuisance factories were soon demolished to build a private airstrip called Barren Island Airfield. Eventually, this was replaced with New York's first municipal airport, Floyd Bennett Field. For more information about sewers, sanitation, and public health in Brooklyn, check out an episode of our podcast, Flatbush in Maine, titled Histories of Waste in Brooklyn, available on our website, www.brooklynhistory.org.